Hey guys, it's Lucky here, and today we're going to go over the solo Magicka Arcanist. The Arcanist is a brand new class added to ESO with the Necrom expansion, and it is feeling really good, especially in solo content. I had an absolute blast playing this character through veteran Vodashun Hollows, testing it all over the place. It's just fun. It's just a really cool build, a really fun build, and it plays differently enough from the rest of the classes that if you've been burning out on any of them, this is definitely one you should try. And if you haven't been burning out on one of them, this is definitely one you should try. So let's dive into it and talk about how this class ticks, what makes it so good, and what gear you should put on, what skills you should use, and all that good stuff. First up, for your race, I'm going to go with Dark Elf. Dark Elf is great because you can go Mag, Stam, and it happens to be best in slot for DPS for both, right? It does really good damage. It's got really good stats. Great alternatives to the Dark Elf or High Elf, Breton, and Khajiit. Any one of those would be great as well. Really fun for solo content. And as for your Mundus, we're going to go ahead and use the Thief Mundus. We're going to have tons of penetration, so we don't need to worry about Lover on this one. And as for our attributes, we're going to put all 64 points into Magicka because that is the path to the most damage, and we want more and more damage to keep this character powerful and to keep its beam going. As for our consumables, we're going to go ahead and use Ghastly Eyeball. This is going to give us 5,000 Magicka, which is a ton. That equates to a ton of additional damage for our character. It's also going to give us 5,000 Magicka regen, which means we don't run out. Alternatively, if you feel like your health's a little low, our sustain on this build is absolutely cracked. So we can get by with less sustain from our food. So if you feel like you need more health, go ahead and use Witch Mother's Potent Brew. That's going to give you a little less Magicka, a little less sustain, but it's going to give you also 3,000 health. So it gives you a little bit of extra, cushion room. I don't think you're going to need it because this build just feels so good. It feels so tanky. I was able to face tank every single boss in the game with it, and I think you will be able to too, especially once you get comfortable with the rotation. For the potion, we're going to use Essence of Spell Critical. We can use Essence of Spell Critical because one of our skills is giving us Major Brutality and Major Sorcery already, so we don't need to spring for those expensive potions. We can use Essence of Spell Critical instead, which is going to give us health back when we use it. It's going to give us Magicka back when we use it, and it's also going to increase our crit chance when we use it. Really powerful potion. All right, now let's talk about the gear that we used in this build. As always, I'm going to give you 3 different loadouts for you to use. One for the people that don't have access to any DLC content, and it's also going to be perfect for starter build before you get into dungeons and before you get into raiding. I'm also going to give you a build for people that are just willing to go into dungeons, but they're not really interested in raids. And then finally, I'll give you one for the people that are willing to take that extra step into trial content. Now, all of these builds can do all of the solo content in the game. Each one is a little bit stronger than the one before it, so pick the one that's right for you. All right, for the non-DLC gear, aka the base game gear, we're gonna put Briarheart on the weapons and the jewelry. This is gonna be your front, your back bar, and all 3 of your jewelry slots. And then for your body, you're gonna put Order's Wrath on. And then for your monster set, you can use Iceheart. Iceheart's gonna provide you a nice shield while you attack things that's gonna protect you from taking damage. Order's Wrath gives you a ton of crit chance, crit damage, and Briarheart is gonna give you a ton of spell damage, and your crit damage are hitting even harder. And remember, if you don't know where any of this gear comes from that I talk about in this build, check out the written guide. It's linked in the description down below, and it tells you where every piece of gear that I'm using comes from for each of these 3 builds, as well as where to find the skills and everything like that. Definitely take advantage of the written guide. It is a very valuable resource. All right, now for the people that are willing to do dungeons, what I'm going to recommend is running Pillar of Nirn and Deadly for your 2 sets, and then running Iceheart as your monster set. Once you can, get the Ring of the Pale Order to pair with this. Ring of the Pale Order is going to bring in tons and tons of health. Pillar of Nirn is one of the hardest hitting, actually the hardest hitting proc set in the game right now, so it does massive damage. It allows you to do massive damage. And Deadly is going to buff the damage that your channeled abilities do. Your channeled abilities on this class include the beam, which is your primary form of damage. So it's buffing your beam by a massive amount, making you do way more damage anytime you're using any of these channeled abilities, as well as dots. It also buffs dots, which you're using a ton of. So perfect set for this build. Now, for the people that are willing to run trials, the only thing I would change from what I just said there with Deadly and Pillar is I'm going to swap the Pillar out for Horror of the Depths. Horror of the Depths you can wear on the body. That's going to be a nice light set. It's going to be great for your Magicka sustain. It's going to be great for your penetration while soloing. And then you're going to wear Deadly on the jewelry and weapons. And that's going to be great for the damage of your dots and your channeled abilities. And if you have any questions about the gear, the enchants, the traits, again, that's on the written guide linked down in the description below. Take advantage of that thing. Okay, next up, let's talk about the skills that we're going to be using on this class. For the first ability on the front bar, we're going to be using Escalating Rune Blades. Escalating Rune Blades is going to be your crux gem generator. It's very unique to this class in Elder Scrolls Online. It is the first time we have a class where you have to generate charges that you can then use to deploy various abilities in the class's kit for different effects. And we'll talk about the effects that those have on the skills that we'll be using it on, because that's very important to know. So essentially what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to use this ability 3 times before using a couple of your other abilities that are going to consume those crux to increase their damage or increase their effectiveness in a very big way. It's just really fun. It feels good to do. So, we'll talk about that. But this is your spammable, and we took the morph that causes it to do AoE damage on the last hit. So it does 3% increased damage for each active crux when you cast it. So the way this ability works is you're going to fire 3 objects at your enemy, and it's going to generate 1 crux per cast of the ability. So you hit the button, 3 objects, 3 projectiles go at the enemy. The final projectile of the 3 does AoE damage, hurting all enemies around your target. So it does great single target damage, and it has really nice cleave to it, and it generates crux, right? So really nice, really effective. Our second ability is going to be Tentacular Dread. This is one of the abilities on this bar that's going to consume crux for greater effectiveness, right? So what this does is you infuse your arm with abyssal magic. You infuse your arm with abyssal magic. You shoot tentacles out of your arm. Feels good, looks really cool. It stuns your enemies for 3 seconds and marks them with abyssal ink. This is really important. That abyssal ink is going to cause them to take 5% increased damage by default if you don't have any crux built up. If you do have crux built up, it's going to add 2% per crux for a total of 11% increased damage to that enemy for the next 20 seconds. So it's a 20-second buff for 11% increased damage. That is huge, simply because we waited until we had 3 crux before we used this ability. And that's a really long debuff on the enemy. So it's great for us, great for our damage. And it's just a really cool ability on top of that. It's a massive rectangle, 5 meters by 15 meters long. That's the range of targets that it's smacking with this. So it's a massive area that it's debuffing at the same time. The next ability on the front bar is going to be Barbed Trap. If you've followed a build in ESO before, you've probably seen this one. It's been good for a long time, and it's still really good now. It's a great single target dot. It pulls from our stamina pool that allows us to diversify, which resource we're spending. So it's great for mag tunes because of that, right? It costs stam instead of mag. It's also one of the hardest hitting single target dots in the game. It's also giving us minor force, which is increasing our critical damage by 10%. And it's giving us those fighter skilled passives that are increasing our weapon and spell damage just for having it slotted, as well as increasing our ult regen. Really, really important to have some fighter skilled abilities on your bar right now, at least 1, and a lot of times 2. So we're going to take advantage of that. Next, we have Deadly Cloak. Deadly Cloak is a really cool dot because it's an AoE dot that sticks to you rather than putting it on the ground. So wherever you go, you're exploding damage and hitting the enemies around you, right? Which is great because that means if they move, they teleport away, you're in a boss fight and it leaps away, right? You run to it. You don't have to recast this. It's already going. And the other really cool thing about this, besides the fact that it does great damage, is that it provides major evasion, increasing your AoE damage reduction by 20%. So you take 20% less damage from any big circle of red on the ground, right? That's huge. That's a big damage reduction. Plus, this class gets minor evasion. So it's getting another 10% for a total of 30% AoE damage reduction, which is part of the reason why we are so tanky on this class. It's just fun. It feels good. And these two skills, like this skill pairs so well with this class in turning you into an absolute beast. Finally, Pragmatic Fate Carver. This is going to be your primary form of damage. This is what's going to turn you into a DBZ character. This, it's going to allow you to Kamehameha all of your enemies in front of you. It's a massive beam, 22 meters long by 3 meters wide. So you aim it, you hit everything in that line for a very long time, and it does massive damage, and it channels for a long time. So you'll notice you're channeling this for a very long time, and it's another crux consumer. So if you use this with 3 cruxes, it's going to consume all of the cruxes and increase the damage done by 33% and decrease the cost of it by 16% per crux spent. So if you have 3 crux, 33 times 3 is what? Almost 100% increased damage and reducing the cost by 40, what is that? Yeah, 48, and reducing the cost by 48%, right? So the crux are just doing amazing things for this skill. And it's going to be your #1 source of damage as a result. So you're always going to want to do a couple things. I'll go over the rotation at the end, but I just want to mention while you're here, you're going to want to use your rune blades, right, to get 3 crux, and then you're going to fire off your tentacular dread, which is going to debuff the enemy, so it's taking more damage for the next 20 seconds. And then you're going to want to use it 3 more times, right? Give or take, it might be less, and we'll talk about why, because you're going to passively generate crux with this build also. So you might only have to cast it 1 or 2 times to have 3 total, but you'll use it a couple more times, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 1, depending on the situation. And then when you have 3 crux, you fire off your beam. So now your beam is doing more damage because your tentacular dreads abyssal ink debuff, and it's doing more damage because it's consumed the crux as well. So massive damage from your pragmatic fate carver. Just a really fun ability. I love this. It's very different from anything else in the game, and I love that about it. You know, finally we got a class that plays different from every other class in the game. But the caveat to that is, if you're expecting to pick this class up and play it and it to feel like every other class in the game, you're going to be surprised. Some people are going to be pleasantly surprised. Some people are going to be unpleasantly surprised that it plays so different. If you give yourself the time to get used to the playstyle, I think you're going to love it. All right. Next, we have Flawless Dawnbreaker. Flawless Dawnbreaker is another fighter's guild ability. That's why it's here. It's for those fighter's guild passives that we'll talk about in the passive section of this video. They're really powerful. You want them on your bar if you can get them there, and you only need 1 ult in ESO, but we get to slot 2, 1 on the front bar, 1 on the back bar, right? But only 1 is going to do the most damage, so we put that one on the back. That's the one we use, and on the front, we just put an ult there that's going to buff our primary damage abilities that we've slotted on the front bar, right? That's how you build your character. Your high DPS abilities go on the front bar, and your bar buffers go on the front bar to buff those high DPS abilities, all right? Sometimes when new players listen to me explain these guides, it can sound like I'm speaking a different language. Don't worry, it's gonna all click with time. Speaking of learning a different language, the sponsor of today's video is perfect for that. Babbel is an app that teaches you new languages by focusing on giving you the tools you need to have conversations in real-world situations. By focusing on preparing you for conversations that you're most likely to have, you become conversational in your language of choice much faster. Since it's an app on your phone, you can learn at your own speed, while commuting, or while sitting at home, or while playing your favorite game. It provides multiple ways to learn to keep you from getting bored. It's got lessons, games, videos, and content about culture. With just a 10-minute lesson a day, you could start having conversations in your new language in as little as 3 weeks. In addition to learning the language, you'll learn about their culture, their people, and their history. If you've ever felt like it would be nice to know another language, use the link in the description down below to get 60% off. Check it out and start learning a new language today so that you can start having brand new conversations a month from now. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the video. Now for the back bar. On the back bar, we're going to be using Unstable Wall of Fire. Unstable Wall of Fire is a massive 18x8 rectangle of fire. You can cast it once to put a massive fire dot on the ground. You can cast it back to back to cause explosions, because every time you recast it, or every time it falls off completely, it explodes. So if there's a few trash mobs in front of you, like 4 or 5, and you just want to pop them, you can cast this ability 2-3 times in a row. And if they're low on HP, that can be an effective way to disperse them. You could also beam them, now that you've got that ability in the game. Next, we have Recuperative Treatise. Treatise? Treatise. Treatise.
Treatise.
Yeah, okay. All right. Next up, we've got Recuperative Treatise. This is an ability that etches a series of runes in your weapon that pulse with power for every 5 seconds, okay? Each one is going to enhance your class abilities and strikes the enemy and deals damage. Okay, so what does that really mean? It means it's going to pulse damage out of you. It's also going to cause your class abilities to do more damage. Every time you strike an enemy with a class ability, it does an additional 4,300 damage unbuffed, right? It's actually going to be a bigger number when you're in combat with all your buffs, taking your potions, your food, all that stuff. And on top of that, it's going to restore 600 Magicka and stamina and generate crux if you have none. So this ability is doing a lot of things. It's doing damage on its own. It's adding damage to your class abilities. It's restoring resources when you use, right? And it's also going to generate a crux. Can you ask for one ability to do more than that? I don't think so, right? So great ability. We're going to take advantage of it. It's going to be great for solo and your sustain and your damage. Next, this is very much a flex spot right here. You can use Resolving Vigor for a 20,000 health heal, right? Or you could use the light armor ability Dampen Magic to get a massive shield. And one is going to cost stam, one's going to cost mag. Both are going to be great, but It's up to you which one you use. I liked Vigor, and there was only a couple points though where I felt like the Vigor was pushing my stamina dangerously low. And if you find that the Vigor is really hard on your stamina supply, then go ahead and use Magic instead, Dampen Magic, because you have unlimited magic with this build. You won't have a problem sustaining your magic, so you can just spam that shield whenever you feel like you're in danger and you need to buy a little time until that Ring of Pale Order brings your health back in. If you don't have Ring of the Pale Order, then you can go ahead and use Evolving Rune Man. This is a heal that is both a burst heal and a heal over time ability, right? It's a little of both in one ability, which makes it great for solo content. Next, we have Crux Weaver Armor. Crux Weaver Armor is going to give you major resolve, and it's also going to cause enemies that hit you while this is active to get minor breach, which is going to decrease their resistances by 3,000. Blows against you are also going to generate Crux once every 5 seconds. This is where I was talking about. You might not have to use your Crux generator 3 times because you've got this skill, Recuperative Treatise, is generating Crux, right? And you've also got Crux Weaver Armor generating Crux. So you might be able to like do your rotation, and then by the time it's time to cast your Tentacular Dread, you might have passively generated enough Crux to have all 3 ready to cast your Tentacular Dread. And same thing for your Pragmatic Fate Carver. It's very easy to see how many Crux you have generated because they'll be floating around you. If you have 1 Crux generated, you'll have 1 triangle floating around you. If you have 3, you'll have 3 triangles floating around you. It looks just like this. So essentially, this ability is giving you major resolve combined with that 30% AoE damage reduction means we are just so tanky. Like, there was times where I was fighting a boss and as I was looking down at my health and I was like, man, I am not even close to dying. I'm not even, a lot of times with my builds, I have so much damage built into them. I see my health bouncing around a little bit, which sometimes makes people uncomfortable, but this thing was just a tank. It was a rock, man. And it just made it so fun to play. Next, we have Scalding Rune. We needed one more nice dot for this build, and so I went with Scalding Rune. Inscribes a rune of cosmic fire into the earth, which takes 2 seconds to arm and then lasts for 24 seconds. This is a really nice dot because when an enemy steps into it and it causes it to go off, it's like a trap, basically, and the dot sticks to them. So if they move around, the dot is still on them, right? It doesn't sit on the ground useless if the enemy moves 3 feet. And on top of that, it does great damage. So it's just a really nice dot. It lasts for 24 seconds, which means it's pretty low maintenance. You don't have to spend a lot of time worrying about whether or not it fell off. And finally, last but definitely not least, our ultimate, the Tide King's Gaze. This is a brand new ultimate added with Necrom. This is the class ultimate, and it's really cool and really fun to use. Basically, you summon an eyeball over top of the head of the enemy, and it shoots a laser beam out of its eye at the enemy, melting it in the process. If that enemy dies, it will switch targets to the next closest enemy, right? And start melting that thing down. It's just really good damage. It looks really cool, and it's really fun to use. So, of course, we're going to take advantage of it. All right, now let's talk about the rotation, because the rotation is pretty important in this build, primarily because you've got your Crux spenders and your Crux generators that you have to kind of keep in mind while you play. Although once you kind of get in the fluid of the action, like it's going to happen pretty naturally that you generate Crux and that you use the skills that spend it. And at first, if you don't want to bother with the min-maxing of making sure you have 3 Crux before you use certain abilities, the build will perform just fine, even with suboptimal Crux usage, if you will. Okay, so how this is going to work is you're going to start the battles by pre-buffing. You're going to cast everything on yourself that you can that won't draw aggro from the enemy, as always, right? So our pre-buffing abilities on this character are going to be our Crux Weaver Armor, right? This is going to give us major resolve. Our Recuperative Treatise, this is going to buff our attacks, our class attacks. It's going to give us, resources back when we hit enemies. Also, we're going to pre-buff with Deadly Cloak. This is a AoE explosion that radiates from our body, but it's not going to draw aggro because, if we were close enough for it to hit him, we'd have already aggroed the enemy. Now our pre-buffs are on. So now we're going to start lacing the enemy with our dots. Go ahead and throw your Wall of Elements down, your Scalding Rune down, then put your Barb Trap under them, right? Now you have all the things ticking. The enemy's probably already hit you once at least, meaning you've generated at least 1 Crux because of this ability. You can go ahead and slap them a couple times with your Escalating Rune Blades, or however many times you need to get 3 Crux. Then you use your Tentacular Dread. smack, right? That did a bunch of damage, and because you had 3 Crux, you laced them with a 20-second debuff that increases the damage they take by 11%. All right, now you're gonna use your escalating rune blades again, probably 2 times because he probably hit you and generated another Crux, right? So another couple times, and then you use your Fate Carver. This is the big beam that you're going to shoot through the enemy, and that's going to be a long channel. And by the time that channel is over, you're going to notice that some of those earlier skills you started with are going to start falling off. And that's basically the rotation. You're going to keep all your dots and buffs up. Anytime all your dots and buffs are out, you're going to try to make sure you get 3 Crux, use your Tentacular Dread, and then get 3 Crux, and then use your Fate Carver. A lot of times that just means you're going to have to cast your Rune Blades once, maybe twice, because you've got a couple of different abilities generating Crux for you, right? Both of your Treatise and your armor. So it's usually, you'll look, oh man, I already have 3. I can just go straight to the Dread, or oh man, I already have 3. I can go straight to my Fate Carver. But generally you want to get your Dread down before your Fate Carver. And sometimes, because this is a 20-second debuff, you'll be able to do 2 Fate Carvers per Tentacular Dread. Get your debuffs down, and then do a Fate Carver, get to 3 again, do another Fate Carver, and then kind of restart the whole rotation. That's it. It's really simple. It might sound kind of complicated, but just, you know, play with it a little bit and you'll be like, oh yeah, there is a nice kind of rhythm to this. It feels really good. And because we're using so many really long dots, they're kind of low maintenance, and you can focus on Rune Blades, Dread, and Fate Carver. All right, now let's go over the passives for the Arcanist, all right? First up, we have Fated Fortune. Fated Fortune is going to cause you to have increased critical damage and healing by 12% for 7 seconds every time you generate or consume a Crux. So basically 100% uptime on a 12% crit damage buff. That's huge. That's a very powerful buff. Next, we have increased Quintessence. When you restore magic or stamina, increase your weapon and spell damage by 5% for 10 seconds. Well, we're restoring magic and stamina constantly because we're using recuperative treatise, right? So we're constantly proccing this, which means we basically also get another 100% uptime on a 5% weapon and spell damage bonus. So that's 2 buffs that we are going to have up 100% of the time because of the way we built this build. All right, next up we have Psychic Lesion. This is going to increase damage dealt by status effects by 15% and status effect chance by 75%. So our status effects that we're going to be putting on the enemy, like our poison on our weapon, our burn on our weapon, our burn from our flame wall, right? All these status effects that we're going to be proccing on the enemy already anyway are going to be doing more damage and happening more often. Finally, we have Splintered Secrets. This is going to increase your physical and spell penetration by 991 per Herald of the Tome ability slotted. We're using a lot of these abilities, which means we get a lot of extra penetration. Here on the front bar alone, we have a bonus of 3,000 penetration, right? Combined with our light armor, combined with our skills and everything like that, we have tons of penetration. Like, we're set. We don't even need to worry about getting more. We're always gonna have enough penetration on this character. Plenty of it, right? Feels good, man. So we don't have to slot like a major breach when soloing, which is nice. You know, it saved, we can just put something fun there instead. Next up in the Soldier of Apocrypha skill line, we've got Aegis of the Unseen. While a beneficial Soldier of Apocrypha ability is active on you, increase your armor by almost 2,000. This is great because we always have one active. We are going to have 100% uptime on that buff because we're using Crux Weaver armor to give ourselves major resolve and to debuff enemies. So we're going to get another 2,000 armor on top of what we already have. Another reason we feel super tanking on this class. Next, we have Wellspring of the Abyss. This is going to increase your health, magic, and stamina recovery by 129 for each Soldier of Apocrypha ability slotted. So you get a free bonus of 129 resource regen because you have this ability slotted. Feels really good. Another reason that our sustain is super cracked on this character. Next, we have Circumvented Fate. This grants you and your group minor evasion for 20 seconds. I talked about this a little bit earlier, and reduces the damage from area attacks by 10%. This effect can occur once every 5 seconds. So all we have to do is cast an Arcanist ability, and then we proc minor evasion for 20 seconds, and it can happen once every 5 seconds, which means we have 100% uptime on this buff as well. Implaceable Outcome. When you consume Crux, gain 4 ultimate. This effect can occur every 8 seconds. We are consuming and generating and consuming Crux like a madman, so we're gonna proc this constantly again. Just gonna help our ult regen. We're gonna take it, right? Next, we have the Curative Rune Forms passives. All right, let's talk about these. Healing Tides increases your healing done by 3% for each active Crux. So, you know, if you do use a heal, sometimes you're going to do 0% extra healing. Sometimes it's going to be up to 9% extra healing based on how many crux you have. Hideous Clarity is going to cause you to restore Magicka or Stamina, whichever's higher, every time you generate crux. Again, we're doing that constantly, which means we're constantly going to get resources back, which means we're never going to run out of them on this build. Next, we have Erudition. Erudition is going to give you increased Magicka and Stamina recovery by 18%. Even more sustain, we'll take it. And you're definitely going to feel that on this class. You're going to feel tanky, and you're going to feel like you have great sustain, and you're going to feel like you have good damage. It's just going to be a lot of fun to play. Next, we have Intricate Rune Forms. If you have a curative rune form ability slotted, it's going to increase your strength of your damage shields by 10%. So if you use one of these abilities, you'll get that passive. If you don't, you won't, which isn't a big deal because you don't really need that. Next, we're going to grab the dual wield passives. Why? Because they're going to make us do more damage. And we're going to have better sustain and more damage and better sustain and more damage. So we're going to take it. But the main reason and the main one we want to look at here is Twin Blade and Blunt. This is the reason you use the weapon you use when you're dual wielding. Like if a build calls for mace or if it calls for daggers, it's this passive. This passive says for each dagger we wear, we get increased critical chance of 812. So 1600 increased critical chance. That's massive. So we're going to rock 2 daggers on the front bar. If you want to use a staff on the front bar on this build, go ahead. That's going to be totally fine. It's going to work just great. It'll do a little bit less damage, but you know, you'll get to pew pew with your staff at range instead of having to smack them with your daggers. But you know how ESO is. You're going to end up in melee range for 99% of fights. Anyway, either the enemy's going to close the gap on you or you're going to close the gap on them. And for the back bar, we are going to use a staff. We're going to use a staff because of the nice AoE damage and the great sustain that it's going to give us. And we're going to take all of these passives because they're going to increase our damage and our sustain with a staff. Next, we're going to grab all of the light armor passives. This is going to increase your penetration. It's going to increase your crit chance. It's going to do a lot of things for your character. It's going to increase your sustain. It's going to reduce the cost of abilities that cost Magicka, right? Your armor passives are really, really, really important. Don't skimp out on them. Get them soon as you can. If you're wearing light armor, get all your light armor passives. If you're wearing medium armor, get all your medium armor passives. And we are going to be wearing all light armor and a piece of medium on the body. So grab those medium armor passives as well, because that's going to increase your crit damage. It's going to increase your ability to sneak. It's going to reduce the cost of stamina abilities, right? Again, really good. You can skip heavy armor because we're not wearing any. Next up, fighter's guild passives. We touched on these a little bit earlier, but these are important because they're going to do things like intimidating presence is going to reduce the cost of the abilities by 15%. So it's good for your sustain. Slayer is going to increase your weapon and spell damage by 3%. For each fighter's guild ability slotted. We always have 1 or 2 fighter's guild abilities slotted, which means you're going to have between 3 and 6% increased weapon and spell damage just for slotting the abilities, not even using them, just for putting them on the bar. You get more damage. It's great. And the next up, Banish the Wicked, is going to regenerate 3 ultimate per enemy killed. This one doesn't stack. So if you wear 2 fighter's guild abilities, you don't get 6 ult regen. It's still 3, right? So for this one, it's just important that you have 1 fighter's guild ability slotted, whereas for Slayer, it does stack for each ability you have slotted. And then finally, Skilled Tracker is going to increase the damage of the fighter's guild abilities that you have slotted by 10% when you use them. Great. Next, we're going to grab Undaunted passives. You're going to grab both of these. These are going to increase your resource pool sizes, and it's also going to give you resources back when you take synergies, your own or somebody else's, right? If you grab a synergy, it's going to give you resources back. So that's always nice and crucial for your sustain and group content. Next up, we're going to take our racial passives. These are usually pretty powerful. And if you pick the race that's relevant to your build type, like a mag build or a sand build, you pick the right race, you're going to have some really powerful passives in there. Next, last but not least, we're going to take Alchemy's medicinal use. This is going to increase your potions duration. So potions by default last for 35 seconds. And if you get this, they last 47 seconds. The potion cooldown is 45 seconds. So that means your potions can last 2 seconds longer than the cooldown if you max out this passive. If you don't invest in this passive, then you have approximately a 25% downtime on potions, which is huge when you consider how much potions are increasing your damage. Next up, we have champion points. I'm going to put those in the written guide. That's going to be linked down in the description below. It's just so much easier to just go down a list and invest them than have me sit here and read that list off to you. And it's a great guide. It's we put a lot of work into those written guides. So definitely, take advantage of it. And that's everything for this build, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, if you learned something, please consider giving it a like and a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm and getting this video in front of more people. I appreciate it. And a massive shout out to my YouTube members for supporting the channel in the big way that you do. If you want to become a YouTube member for perks like behind the scenes footage, access to a private Discord channel, and always having my ear, click the link down in the description below on how to become a member. For everyone else, thanks for watching, guys. And if you're not sure what to do next, maybe check out one of my other guides popping up on screen right now.